Hi, I'm Keith, your dialect coach for the Importance of Being Earnest. The information I will cover today is all on the British RP sound change sheet that was distributed at your first read-through. And before we begin, a note that is also at the top of that sheet. You must warm up. Every rehearsal, every performance, even between scenes, you must develop a routine of warm-ups that you do ideally together as a cast. British comedies are about class, relationships, and about pace. And for this or any dialect to be understood by an audience when delivered at a relatively rapid pace, that dialect must be crisp, precise, well articulated, well projected on stage at least, and be connected to your emotional intentions. A separate warm-up video I provided will cover a good routine that you may use with your fellow cast members. Now, speech in England is inextricably associated with class. Each social class generally has its own pronunciation of phonemes, inflection patterns, and vocabulary. The dialect we'll be working with for this show for the majority of the characters is called British RP, or received pronunciation. This was the dialect used by people who wished to be received by polite society, and specifically by royalty. If you ever hoped to be in the presence of Her Majesty, you would likely need to sound as though you belonged there. Now, some general notes about this dialect. The tongue is never in the way of sounds. American English generally suffers from what we call significant R intrusion into vowels that precede the R phoneme. For instance, the word harm, H-A-R-M, is often pronounced in America as harm or harm, with the tongue rising up to fill the oral cavity on what should be an open vowel. Car, dorm, court. Words like these frequently suffer from an intrusive tongue. The rule is, if the tongue is not in use on the sound, it should be relaxed at the bottom of the mouth, with the tip of the tongue resting at the back of the bottom teeth. Now, the placement, or the focal point of the dialect, is quite forward in the mouth. The dialect is not stuffy or trapped behind the lips. As a matter of course, it is instead freely flowing and vocalized. Freely flowing and vocalized. All right. American speech also tends to have an inflection pattern that finds the energy or pitch of the speech falling off at the end of the sentence. Hey John, how you doing? I was going to move the truck last night, but my ass was exhausted after work. Going down, going down. The British dialect does not do this, but instead uses a somewhat regular pitch with quite musical changes to express specific points. You can hear examples of some regularly used inflection patterns in the recorded materials I provided at the first read-through. Now, finally, the tip of the tongue is essential for the rapid delivery of this dialect. Sounds needn't explode from the mouth, but it should be crisp. We accomplish this by using only the amount of pressure required on consonants to trap and release the sound. And there's more on this as well in the warm-ups. The first sound change is the flat A, and in this particular instance I suggested examples such as fast, bastard, cast from the American English. Now, what you do is you would go through the entire copy of this Lady Bracknell monologue and you would mark all of the sounds that have a flat A. If we look at the first sentence, well, I must say Algernon, that, I think it is high time, that. Mr. Bunbury made up his mind whether he was going to live or die. The shilly shallying with the question is absurd. So you go through the entire thing and you locate those flat A's in American, And then you go to what is called the Ask Word List that I provided you a copy of. And you look them up. If they're on that list, they are pronounced ah instead of ah. The examples I gave on the sheet: fast becomes fast, bastard becomes bastard. It's not on this list, but I have another source called the Longman Pronunciation Dictionary. So the Longman Pronunciation Dictionary is available to the production as well. If it's not on this list and there's a question, we can look it up here. But it is bastard, and of course, instead of cast, it is cast. So if we look at the sentences, Barbara is spry, but she can't dance. We look those up, we would see that can't is on the Ask Word List, and dance is also on the Ask Word List. So the sentence becomes, Barbara is spry, but she can't dance. Say it after me. She can't dance. Can't dance. The tongue is relaxed at the bottom of the mouth. It's a nice open sound, the jaw drops. It's not she can't dance, but she can't dance. The jaw must open. Second sentence, I'd rather the bastard weren't driving so fast. I'd rather the bastard weren't driving so fast. Ha, fast. All right. If it is not located on the ask word list, it remains a. In this case, that is not the bat with which he hit the cat. I'm a dog bat myself. The matter at hand, as he said, is his rash. None of those are on the ask word list. Now, take note. Can, C-A-N, I can, is a flat A in RP. Can. C-A-N apostrophe T is can't. So can and can't. I have seen 3 productions of the 6 productions of The Importance of Being Earnest that I've watched in my lifetime, wherein inevitably the line comes up, a handbag, which must be pronounced with flat A's, handbag. Please do not say handbag. Dear God, don't do that to me. There are many of these here in the Lady Bracknell copy, but there are only two that count as sound changes for this dialect. Very good, moving on. So we covered a and r. Now the broad A, r, as in car and father and arms, is a nice round sound. Again, the tongue is flat at the bottom of the mouth. The lips are nice and open and round. R, r. You can't be serious. You can't be serious. Your father. Is that your car? Ah. Alms for the poor. Or for the poor, technically. But we'll get there. We'll get there. And all R sounds formed with the letter O require that you stretch your cheeks forward a bit. So instead of off and on and bother, they become off and on and bother. All right. Now the next sound is the AW or Lesak number 3 sound, or. Now in this form, the tongue is still at the bottom of the mouth on the vowel, or. The lips have an opening about the size of your thumb, or. And that is it. So words such as LAW, law, or AWFOL, awful, awful, or WALL, 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 or SWARM, swarm, the swarm. Okay. Also, all OR words, also, all OR words such as DORM, dorm. Now look here. This is one of those words where we would have an R intrusion if this was American. We wouldn't say dorm or dorm. You hear how the tongue may be in the way. The tongue is relaxed at the bottom of the mouth. Dorm. Because we never say the R in this particular dialect, in this word, DORM, dorm. Is that your dormitory? Your dorm room, FOR, for, FORM, form. ORDER, order, right? PORCH, porch. WATER, water, water. ALMOST, almost, almost. And SORRY is never sorry, sorry. It's too small a lip opening and your tongue is in the way. Instead it's all sorry, sorry. I'm so sorry, so terribly sorry, 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 sorry. Thumb-sized opening. The lawyer's awfully awkward daughter ought to be taught to draw. All that sized, all stretched forward and relished. Oh, very good. O-H-O. Instead of saying O, which we would say in American speech, this is O, O. There's a little bit of an O, O. So it moves from to O, O. Instead of L-O-W, low, it becomes low. Instead of S-E-W, it becomes so. And S-O becomes so. And T-O-E becomes tell. Yes, you know, it's not unusual for so many people to feel so very bad about what they've said before. Now, I will point out that the RP dialect is different than the one I've been using. I'm now going to change over to only using RP. It's going to sound a bit different than the way I started. All right, so, row, I'm your beau, omen. All right, Joan's toes were the most lovely rose colour. Joan's toes were the most lovely rose colour. All right? Oh. Interestingly, the phoneme, as in tuck and butter and run, becomes, when said quickly, ah. So instead of butter, it becomes butter. You know, yes, but, her butter. Love. Oh, fuck me. Now, what we call the neutral for phoneme, as in under and sun and love and cut and run, in this particular dialect becomes ah. So instead of loving someone, you love them. Instead of cutting someone, you've cut them. Instead of being under something, it is under something, all right? Your bug is a wonder, and I love to be under Bunbury. Bunbury, all right? It's no wonder her butter is beloved. It has no bugs. All right? An unstressed Y buzz, and a Y buzz is the E sound, berry, cherry in American English, wary, merry, in unstressed syllables. So cherry, the E is unstressed because it's the end of the word, the accent's on the first syllable. Cherry, berry, merry, contrary, all right, becomes I, shortened. There's no buzz to it, E, it becomes I. So instead of cherry, it becomes cherry, right? Instead of very, it becomes very. Instead of fairy, it becomes ferry, all right? Or like an I. While pretty, they sullied the view with sundry weighty matters. Yes, while pretty, they sullied the view with sundry weighty matters. Right? This next sound may be unfamiliar to you. This is the R derivative. This occurs in words like bird, turn, world, hurt. It is somewhere between a consonant and a vowel. It's not a hard R, really, but instead is this approached R that we use in the word like bird and turn. We don't say bird and turn, but bird and turn. It changes to something that more closely resembles an all right? So instead of bird, it becomes a bird, bird, So the rest of the mouth forms this sort of R shape, but the tongue goes back down to the bottom of the mouth and says ah, a bird. Absurd, absurd, absurd. Urge, instead of urge. Instead of irksome, irksome. Instead of certain, certain. The earth turns on its axis as certainly as the birds sing. The earth turns, of course, the earth turns on its axis as certainly as the birds sing. And then this next sound is the liquid U. We hear, in American English, we hear the word music. It's that sound, that U, music. All right, that's what's called a liquid U. It used to exist in American English in words such as D-E-W, the dew on the grass, or the N-E-W-S, the news, we're going to watch the news. But American English reduced that to a single phoneme, news and do. We retain it in other places, but in RP, it remains in words like news, and new, and duke, and Tuesday, and nuclear, and assume. Those are the primary vowel changes. So what you would do is you would go through the entire text, and you would find those one at a time in the text. And what I've done on the Bunbury monologue from Lady Bracknell is I've marked them all. So there is. Now that completes the vowel changes. Now what you should do is you should go back to the monologue, Lady Bracknell's monologue, and sound by sound, you should go through the monologue and locate each of the examples of where that sound occurs and mark the change. So you would go and find all of the flat A's, as we've already done, and you'd mark those as R. Then you would go and find all of the R sounds marked as O, as in bother and off and on. You'd mark those, and you have to relish those. Then the number 3 sounds, or, as in law and awful, but also wall and tall and porch and dorm and sorry. You'd mark all of those and make sure you point out, you need to relish those and get that tongue out of the way on the OR sounds. And then all of the O's, and then all of the R's that become R. And then finally the unstressed Y buzzes. In time you'll see E in an unstressed syllable. The R derivatives spelled IR or OR generally, or ER. Bird, absurd, urge. And the liquid U's, U, news, new, tune, duke. Make sure those are marked. Let's talk about the consonants. The RP dialect, and British dialect in general, is what we call non-rhotic, meaning that the R's are generally not pronounced unless they occur between vowels. But if the sound is at the end of a word, it is generally not pronounced unless the next word begins in a vowel. Once again, the R is between 2 vowels. All right? When it is not pronounced, you defer to the vowel. So instead of fear, we say fear. Instead of star, we say star. Instead of porter, we say porter. Or, por, like that number 3 sound, or, porter. Right? It disappears into the vowel. The sneer of the schoolmaster, master, right? Put fear in the eyes of his students. Mr. Webster drove his car 50 miles over its limit. So the R in over, we don't say if the word's alone, over, but we do say it if the next word begins in a vowel. Over it, because we link the R to the following vowel sound, over its limit. Those are called consonant vowel bridges. Anytime a word ends in a consonant and the next word begins in a vowel, we link them over its limit. All right, good. Now, R occurring between vowels is pronounced. Sometimes it is tapped, depending on the speed of your speech. So, Harry, very, instead of very, very. Instead of Bunbury, Bunbury. Instead of carriage, carriage. Instead of experience, experience. Instead of Harry, Harry. Instead of terrible, terrible. Instead of period, period. Instead of sorry, sorry, sorry. All right, it's tapped almost like a D. Harry's terrible experience was the talk of the ceremony. Right, and Harriet arrived in a carriage to marry a barrister. Very good. Now, sometimes R is inserted between vowels to make transition between 2 words easier, especially if a word ends in a vowel and the next word begins in one. So, in this particular instance, the idea is would instead be said, the idea is, and instead of India and Pakistan, we would say India and Pakistan. All right. Now, there are a couple of other sounds that are essential to the British dialect when it comes to consonants. The first is something called a syllabic L and a syllabic N. Now, you will be tempted to say button, or mutton, or subtle, or little, and insert a breathy phoneme in between the T and the L or the T and the N. It doesn't happen generally in the British dialect. Instead, you simply release from one sound into the other. Instead of saying button, you say button or button. And you release the soft palate, letting the air come out of the nose. Button, right? Instead of subtle, you say subtle, and you drop the sides of the tongue. Subtle, and a sound comes out of the sides of the tongue. Instead of mutton, you say mutton, mutton, mutton. It catches at the soft palate. Forgotten, 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 all right? Instead of forgotten, forgotten, all right? Don't release the tongue on the T to form the L or the N. You simply release into the next sound. Double S sounds in words like ISSUE, issue, becomes issue. Instead of TISSUE, instead of tissue, becomes tissue. All right. And then the L is always at the front of the tongue. When you say silly, 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 and sallow, and tallow, and hello, it's all very much at the front of the tongue. All right. The final sheet reviews some very specific sounds in word pronunciations. Again becomes again. Against becomes again. Aluminum becomes aluminium. Bin becomes bean. Where have you been? Where have you been? Clerk, clerk as in the clerk at the front desk becomes the clerk. Derby becomes derby. Either becomes either. Figure becomes figure. Garage becomes garage. Hostel becomes hostile. Instead of laboratory, it becomes laboratory. Instead of nephew, nephew with a V. Instead of neither, it becomes neither, ending on . Instead of privacy, it becomes privacy. Instead of process, it becomes process. Instead of schedule, it becomes schedule. Instead of tomato, it becomes tomato. And then there are certain things you don't say. We don't use a lot of articles. Instead of going to the hospital, you go to hospital. If you went to the University of Virginia Tech, you went to university. Right? One doesn't go on a vacation, just one goes on vacation. There are also contractions formed with certain pronouns. Instead of she said, it becomes, well, she said. That's exactly what she said. And instead of he was, yes. Was he at the store? Yes, he was. We wouldn't say that. We say, yes, he was. Instead of we were, yes, we were. Instead of you know, it becomes you know. And instead of there are, there are. And of course, ORY and ARY endings become a single syllable. Instead of saying necessary, one says necessary. Instead of elementary, elementary. Instead of contradictory, contradictory. Instead of history, history. So now what you should do is you should go back to the Lady Bracknell copy, and you should go through sound by sound and mark all of the places where you find the sound in question. And then, above that place where it occurs, you should mark what it changes to. So go through and find all of the examples of the number 6, which we've done. Then all of the R's formed with O, the number 3 or sound, including words formed with OR and ALL, wall and dorm and for and torture and porch and fortune. All right, mark those. Then go back to the whole thing again and find all of the O sounds, as in row and home and phone, and change them to O. Put a little EH before the O, insert it in there, O. And do this with the entire list of vowel sounds and then consonants as well. And make sure that you practice then with this marked piece of copy. If you're going to develop your instinct for this dialect, you have to do so using a piece that you've marked, that you can work through. And so what I will do in separate video is I will speak the Lady Bracknell for you, making sure that all of the sounds are covered. But here's the catch. Even I am not infallible. You're an actor and I'm an actor. We work together on these things. So in my presentation of that monologue, If you find there's a mistake, you need to tell me. And I think you must assume that I, being a human being, am capable of making mistakes. So are you. And that's the thing you need to realise about this dialect. You will never be 100%, but if you can get into the 95% range, it will be completely truthful. And the idea is you must work this dialect early, so that come time to do the show, you're not thinking about it. All right? So, enjoy the work, because it's a great deal of fun, and it's something you'll be able to add to your repertoire of dialects you can use as an actor going forward. The RP dialect is not used terribly much anymore. Oscar Wilde plays, certainly Noel Card, other plays from the 50s and prior. RP fell out of fashion come the presence of Princess Diana, which changed British culture considerably. So you don't really hear RP very much these days, except in historical pieces from periods that predate Princess Diana appearing on the scene. So enjoy RP, and I look forward to hearing your dialect come January. Work it. Continue working it. Speak it around your family. Annoy the living shit out of them. Because what else are the holidays for? God knows, many of our parents are going to annoy the living shit out of us. Happy holidays!